There we go.
Ready?
Yes.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Deep Creek Watershed Board of Zoning Appeals for November 16th, 2023. I'll now call the meeting to order. I ask at this time that everybody put their cellular devices on silent or turn them off. We have a quorum present, so we will begin. I'm your board chair, Bruce Swift. In attendance today, to my left, Bill Ingram, Bob Hoffman, Mike Beard, and then zoning administrator Chad Pike down here, Bruce Metz to my right, and Steve Nagy down here in front. So we are your Deep Creek Lake Watershed Board of Zoning Appeals. We are appointed by the Garrett County Commissioners and serve at their pleasure. The purpose of this board is to provide competent interpretation and full equitable application of the Deep Creek Watershed zoning ordinance. Gentlemen, in your package you should have had minutes from the last meeting. I trust everybody's reviewed them, and at this point I'll look for if there's no corrections or additions, I'd look for a motion to approve as written.
Make a motion to approve.
Do we have a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So passed. So at this point we'll move on to the public portion of our hearing today, and today we have a pretty unique case for our board. We don't hear many interpretations. I think this is the first one since 2009, something like that. So bear with us. We'll do the best we can. So do we have somebody here that's going to present in favor of this interpretive hearing?
Yep.
Let me just announce what that is first.
Okay.
This is an interpretive appeal, number 20, an application submitted by Stuart and Lizette Fox for an interpretation to allow the construction of a single-family residence with decks approximately 23 feet from the ground to within 11 feet of the side setback, side property line, and mistakenly I left out 5 feet of the rear property line. The property is located along Marsh Hill Road, tax map 50, parcel 326 and 821, grid 1, and is zoned LR1.
So let me read one other thing that has to do with this interpretive hearing today. Today, this is an interpretive hearing. And what 157 and 164 says, upon appeal from a decision by the zoning administrator, the board shall decide any question where it is alleged that there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination, including any order requiring an alleged violation to stop, cease, and desist made by the zoning administrator in the enforcement of this chapter, or B, involving the interpretation of any provisions of this chapter, including determination of the exact location of any district boundary if there is uncertainty with respect thereto. What I understand that to mean, fellow board members, is the only thing we are here today to decide is whether the zoning office made a mistake in their interpretation of the pertaining code, which in this case is 157.045. Whether we agree with that particular code or not is irrelevant. We're here to decide whether this office made an error in their interpretation of that ordinance. So, will you please stand, raise your right hand, repeat after me. You solemnly swear that testimony that you're about to give in front of the Deep Creek Lake Watershed Board of Zoning Appeals is the truth?
Yes.
You so confirm? State your name and address for the record.
Stuart Fox, 910 North Alfred Street, Alexandria, 22312.
Please proceed, Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Stuart Fox. My wife, Lizette, and I are the owners of 3 vacant lots on Marshall Road. We've actually been to this body twice in the past. The first time was in 2020 when we were initially looking to do one house on one of the 3 lots with 60 feet of width. We had 1 kid at the time. We listened carefully to this body's feedback on setbacks, spacing, and massing. And in 2021, you granted us a variance after we came back and proposed 1 home on 1.5 lots on 90 feet of width. We had 2 kids at the time. And after having our third child earlier this year and further evaluating the spacing and setbacks on the property, we intentionally allowed the variance to lapse while we pivoted to one home on 2 full lots, which is 120 feet in width. As much fun as it is, I hope that this is the last time that I come to before you, and the last child my wife and I have. 3 is enough. We can't handle 4. These lots have been vacant for a very long time for a variety of reasons. Chief amongst them is the size and slope of the lots, with over 30 feet of vertical drop on the 30 feet building envelope east to west. This challenging building profile is a major part of the reason we are now proposing to build on 2 lots instead of 1, 3 kids aside, and why we are building down 2 levels from the entry instead of up any, which puts us at grade with the eastern exit on the lakeside, minimizes the mass and scale of the building from rising up from both the street side and from the lakeside. This has raised the question, what is considered the ground story of this home in the zoning ordinance for the purposes of the projection into the required yards. I've learned a good amount about this complicated question over the last few months, but to better understand the nuances of that question and its history, I'd like to invite Rich Skipper and Samantha Gravel to address much better than I can. But before I do, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Bruce.
With that said, I'd like to reserve my right to respond at the end of the hearing, and I'll turn it over to Rich.
You swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give in front of the Deep Creek Lake Watershed Zoning Board of Appeal is the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Richard E. Skipper, Highland Engineering Survey, 1426 Memorial Drive.
Please proceed.
All right. I've got a copy of Chad's letter they sent out for the permitted projection interpretation staff notes.
Rich, can I get you to speak into the microphone for the folks at home?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I can usually be heard. I'm at odds with a couple of the statements that Chad has made here, and that's what I want to address first. It says that this office has historically interpreted the ground story to be the story above the lowest basement level. 99.9% of the construction permits that you see, that is correct. That the ground story, the basement, the first story above the basement has been considered the ground story. That is also 99.9% of the time the entrance level. And therefore, that's an accurate statement. This is not that type of project. This, you must enter on the 3rd level. And so I think historically, and I know, and I've got quite a bit of copies, hopefully you don't want to see them all, of projects that we've worked on where the interpretation from this office in the past has been that the entry level is interchangeable, wording-wise, with the first story level. And in some cases, it has been quite hot and involved attorneys, title companies, and this, that. And in 2009, there was one specific one where John Nelson made the interpretation over Jim Torrington. That, Jim, you know that the entry floor level is the first story. So historically, that has been the determination of this when there's an oddity involved, when it doesn't meet the 99% of the cases involved. And Samantha, she's got all that information with her, but she can share that with you. Well, I understand we put it up on the thing that you can see the process. And at that time, I'd like to be able to step in and explain particulars with that, with Samantha and let her handle that. The other thing, and this speaks to what Bruce first said, that about the determination being made in error. Okay. The statement there is either all these cases in the past, and there's a large amount of them, were made in error, or this determination is in error. Okay? The whole thing with Mr. Fox's project, this isn't really about Mr. Fox's project. This is a determination of what the first story or the ground story level is. And I'm giving you that historically, that has been the entry floor level. Samantha has done a lot of research today and has found quite a few professional definitions that points to the fact that in most cases, the street level, entry level, is considered the ground story level of a building, irrelevant if it has 4 levels below it, 4 levels above it, like skyscrapers or whatever like that, that the entry level is considered the ground level. The second point, and I don't belabor this a whole lot, but the very end of it says, but rather that his determination is in keeping with both the specific requirements and general intent of the zoning ordinance. In the zoning ordinance, when it comes to height, because that seems to be the real hiccup here, is this deck is going to be 23 feet up in the air. Okay? Every other issue that was written in the ordinance relating to height is very specifically spoken. 50-foot maximum, 30-foot medium height, outbuildings only to a certain height. Very, very, very well struck. This is not. That's because the architecture involved in placing a deck on a building doesn't take into consideration a height. It's a matter of a structural integrity of the building, putting the deck. And in this case, there are not going to be any big, long deck poles or posts holding it up. This is a totally cantilever deck, which reduces from the mass of the whole thing anyway. But I have been involved with Deep Creek Lake Watershed zoning since its inception. I helped write a lot of it, had a lot of input, and there's quite a few of the more recent changes to the ordinance that have my fingerprints on them, that I've helped shed, and those yet to do. It's my interpretation that if this was intended, we, when we wrote this, would have addressed it. So I don't think that we can say that it is in keeping with the general intent of the zoning ordinance. There's an old adage about the Queen's English is the Queen's English. The courts have upheld that big time. They like to quote it every time they get a Supreme Court or Superior Court case. The other thing that they like to lean on is the intent of an instrument is that which is written on the face of the instrument. So we can't broaden that out and say they meant to say, or they intend, we think the intent was this. What it says is what it says. So the only issue really before you all is, what is the proper definition of ground story? And then we follow the letter of the ordinance. And in this case, if we take the second level, above the basement, below the entry level, it does not match any definition in any book of the ground story, which is what Chad wants us to do. In any book, it is either the most lowest ground level or one at the street level. The second floor level of this, the level below the entry level, is neither. It's neither on the ground nor is it up at the entry level. It's in between. So with that said, the definition in itself of ground story cannot be the second floor. We're all going to have to put a deck down at the basement level or up the entry level. And I propose that we do the entry level. I'll let Samantha take over, and like Mr. Fox said, if I can, come back and respond to any questions you may have, or if you have some now, entertain.
I want to address a couple things. Number one, we are counseled as a board that precedence doesn't matter in our application as a zoning ordinance, whether we agree or not. I don't know that we can consider, I mean, we've been told we can't consider precedence and different things like that. Is it true that you could build this house, I mean, to make that level, a ground level, I mean, to walk on from the street level, you're going to have to introduce some fill material to do that? So
Samantha can speak to that, but yes.
if you could build this house, I wouldn't, but you could build this house where the parking was at street level and you walk down steps to come in that second level.
That would be difficult.
It's done, I mean, we've seen it done though,
Yeah,
right?
it's not necessary there for the parking. That's the big issue there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're taking up the entire space next to Marshall Road with parking.
From the house back to the road, or the
Yes,
front
yes.
setback, I guess.
Yes, and virtually the width of the
Mhm.
lot, it goes 120 feet. I mean, to get the parking in there, it could be done.
Mhm.
It would be difficult, problematic.
Not the best use of the lot, in my mind, but.
That's something that the ordinance thankfully doesn't
Mhm.
know. Beauty's in the eyes of the beholder.
Mhm.
And this young couple have a desire to build this house here, and that really is what it's all about. But as to the precedent of the thing, okay, that's great in a variance case. In a variance case, you can't say you gave Joe Blow over here a variance, he had exactly the same thing going on. That doesn't matter. That was over there. This is here. This is not about Mr. Fox's project. This is about the interpretation of what ground story. Then, once we determine that, then the ramifications of the building. It's that, so historically, this office now has changed its position or definition of what ground story is. And we're asking you to hold to the old historic determination, that it's the entry floor level. John Nelson's words specifically to Jim Torrington, in that case, and she'll show it to you, there's a basement, and there's only one story above, okay? But they go up 8 feet of steps to a deck around the house. The deck was built within 9 feet of the property line. Jim says, no, the basement level is the ground story. Basement level is the ground story. Therefore, the deck has to be 15 feet to meet the setback. Or, I'm sorry, thinking it was the rear yard. So it had to be 40 feet. It was grandfathered at 17, so but it needed to be 17. And John said, no, that is the entry floor level, and this office always has said that the first story level is the entry floor level. Therefore, that's an entry level deck, can go to within 5 feet of the line, and the 9 feet is fine. And the title company said, that's good enough. And they sold the property. Because the title company was holding it up, because on my plat, I had put a note based on Jim Torrington that this property did not meet zoning setbacks because the deck was too close to the line. They wanted me to remove that. So the only way for me to remove that was to come in and have a meeting with Jim. The next day, have a meeting with Jim and John. And John made the determination. And he told you that the entry floor level is interchangeable, wording-wise, with the first story level. That's not what we're hearing now. So I don't think it has a thing to do with precedence about a particular case or anything. This is just an interpretation of the office now versus the office then, and it has nothing to do with previous cases.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, Samantha, raise your hand and stand up.
You swear that the testimony that you're about to give in front of the Deep Creek Lake Watershed Board of Zoning Appeals is the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Samantha Gravel, Highland Engineering and Surveying, 1426 Memorial Drive, Oakland, Maryland, 21550.
please step up to the microphone and proceed with your presentation.
I have a few printed documents here with me that I will be happy to pass here to let the board see. I unfortunately did not get these scanned early enough to get over to Chad to be able to put up. But I have done a fair amount of research, and ground story is a somewhat ambiguous term and is a little tricky to find a definition for, as it is not always used by various things. In most cases, ground story, ground floor are used somewhat interchangeably in a lot of technical documents. But I do have a number of documents here from buildingwiki.com. The term ground level or ground floor is used to refer to the level of a building that is ground/street level. The term story tends to refer to all levels of a building above the ground level. Happy to pass that for you to see. From Wikipedia, on the definition of story, it states that the floor at ground or street level is called the ground floor. This is from a streets and buildings regulations document. I'm not 100% sure the jurisdiction, but ultimately it says a ground story means that story of the building to which there is an entrance from the outside on or near the level of adjoining ground or street. When there are two such stories, then the lower of the two, provided that no story of which the floor level is more than 4 feet below the level of the adjoining ground or street, to be a ground story. And stuff. This is from some Iowa codes, and it says that the ground floor means the floor of a building with a building entrance on an accessible route. A building may have one or more ground floors, where the first floor containing dwelling units in a building is above grade. All units on that floor must be served by a building entrance on an accessible route. This floor will be considered to be a ground floor. The only accessible route to access this building would be from the street or entrance level. This is the first one. If I could pull up one of the things I sent to Chad earlier, I can show you all the site plan and then also some photos that I took a couple days ago of the home on South Shore Road that Rich referred to, in which John Nelson had ruled that the deck within 9 feet of the rear line was acceptable as it was on the entrance floor.
That's the ready one.
Yep.
Put that on presenter laptop.
All right, so this first sheet is the site plan that we did, and as you can all see, this multi-level deck is at 9 feet from the rear line. The house is at 17, which is grandfathered, as Rich mentioned. And then if you go to, this is just an invoice from us that is documenting Rich's meeting with the zoning office staff to try and resolve it. And then the next page on here, this is a photo from the driveway of this residence. The steps on the left side of the photo are the steps that Rich referred to that go up to the deck that allow access to the entrance on the rear side of the building. And then this is a photo from the side of the building where you can see the other side of the house in those decks. The corner that is within 9 feet is the corner that you can see closest to the line of shrubs there on the right. And then this is just a photo somewhat showing the height of this deck in the rear. The shrubbery, vegetation, and a nearby detached garage made photos a little tricky to get, but I did my best. Rich, did you want to add further to this particular?
On the first photo, underneath the porch here on the front, there is an entrance into the building. At the time, it was a sliding glass doors and all. Now it's been replaced with a single door with that's where your doorbell and the whole 9 yards is. And that's why Jim was saying that this is that has to be considered the ground story, whereas John stepped in and said, no, they go up the steps, go into the thing, that's their entry into the living area of the house. So that is entry floor level. And in this case, that would match Chad's interpretation exactly, because it is only the first story above the basement. But that's not, that point I'm making there is that the words ground story and entry level were synonymous at that time.
Well, I think that's what I was saying, that the floor level above the lowest basement level. I think this was all built without permits too, wasn't it, in '09?
In '09, yes, and they had to get permits, $8,000.
They
Got
got
a
it all
very
done.
angry letter from Pam Holloway, and finding that deck where it was cost them $8,000.
Yeah, I don't remember him. I just looking at our permit history quickly, and it's all that it was non-permitted.
I show the Lakeshore Drive.
Yeah, that's the most
All right.
closest to what we're doing.
This is a site plan that we did for 1565 Lakeshore Drive. This particular site plan was to build a detached accessory building and do a few additions to the home, and then extension and expansion of the existing deck. As you can see here, the house itself is just over 41 feet, and the decks clearly extend into the rear setback section. And then I took some photos at this residence as well. This is from near the street, from in the driveway near the street. This is clearly the main entrance to the home. You can see in the rear, deck on that level, deck on the level below, and in additional photos, then in the next photos, you will be able to see this is the entrance level here, this is the mid-level, and then there is, the next photo will show even better, there is another level basement below those 2 levels. You can also see how high these particular decks are in the air. One of the items that Chad had mentioned in his letter to all, specifically noted that the intent was to try to limit the height of things. And this was also an example of, these decks are probably actually higher in the air than what we would be proposing on this particular project, even though the main question is if ground story does equal the entrance level or Chad's definition.
I wasn't here then.
2001.
I wasn't here yet, so
Um,
I don't have any other history on
You
that
need to
one.
go back to and read all of them.
I pulled the permit out, but that's all there was, site plan, so I don't know any more about that one.
Rich, do you have anything to add about this one?
That's
And then I do have one other example. Yep, there is, this is a home on Mallard Loop. That is the original site plan for when the house was built. We then did a location survey after that, which shows the very elaborate decking and walkways and things that are were on this project. And then the next below this, this is actually a sketch that Rich made in conversations with, I believe it was John Nelson at that time, more or less about this exact issue. Once it came time for construction, They actually had to make some changes, and did not end up building this home in exactly this way, due to excavation issues. And so the way that this home was actually built, does ultimately fit Chad's definition, but it still is the decks from the entrance level that if you go back up to this one, again, you can see the house itself is 41, so at the setback, and these decks on both the entry level and levels below all extend into the setbacks. And then if we go down a little bit, then I have some photos that in this case I actually stole from a Rayleigh property listing. This property was sold earlier this year, and so I took advantage of their very nice professional photos that are better than my photos. But those first two pictures are showing the access to these decks from the parking level, the entry level, and then if you go down a little bit more, then we have a couple views from the lakeside showing those very tall decks that extend into the setback areas. Did anyone have any other questions for me at this time?
Keep talking about a decision that a previous administrator made. Do we have any kind of memorandums on them or anything written anywhere about that? We just assuming that's correct.
From our records, this was a 1994 permit, so that predates building permits. We had zoning at the time. I think all we had was this original site plan, just showing the house.
And that was in 1994.
94. So we started, zoning's been around since 75. We didn't start building permits till 97. So our records, when you get prior to building permits, sometimes we don't have house plans or any profiles or anything. I didn't find anything else on this one. So.
Not a letter or anything from John?
No, I just pulled the zoning permit. I didn't pull it on the one you just sent me on South Shore. I did pull these Mallard and Lakeshore. I didn't find anything other than just a signature and a site plan. So I didn't have anything one way or the other about any interpretation.
I guess the invoice where Rich had obviously noted that he had been attempting to resolve the issue with Jim is the closest to the true documentation that we do have.
Okay.
And that the site plans, do support that those decks do extend into the setback area.
But I don't know that I would probably interpret that one the same way, because it was just a deck above the lowest basement.
That's why I said it matches your interpretation, it's just the wording that was used was the entry floor level is the ground level.
And I think your point, past interpretations do matter in interpretive hearings. So I think that's relevant information. I wasn't aware of it, but it's relevant.
There are no other questions for me. Rich or Stuart, do you have anything?
Do you want to show them the profile at this point or not?
I do have some cross sections that I did that are essentially specific to the concept design that Stuart is proposing. And so yeah, that's the cross sections one. And so this is just so this top one here, this is just a simple cross section through the lot that does help just to illustrate, the concept of how the house would basically look on the lot. We do also have some 3D renderings that show this house in the same thing, which I'm happy to show, although they are technically, specific to Stuart's proposed home and not necessarily specific to the definition of the ground story. So I'm happy to show those 3D renderings. We've got them on here too.
Okay, I've provided them to everyone and sent them a month ago too.
Yes, yeah, we had sent those a month ago. So, there are 2 sets of 3D renderings on Alt 1. So Alt 1, this is the actual proposed residence. And this is, views from basically all sides of sort of what, the proposed residence would look like. This is concept plan still, so this may not be the exact final design. We are well aware of height requirements, restrictions of the counties. All of that will definitely be kept in mind and will comply with all of that. And ultimately, based on the determination today, essentially, if the board does agree that the ground story is the story directly above the basement level, then what the alternative for this particular project would be that then that middle level that you see here, this one right here, basically what would happen is that level would then just move up on top, which would ultimately raise the overall mass and bulk of the structure even more. We feel that this particular proposal best uses the actual topography of the site and makes the house where it is being built into the hillside as opposed to having more of the house built up out of the ground. The alternative would basically make the whole thing taller. And in my cross sections that I had just, that we had up a second ago, if you can go back to that one and then zoom out a little bit further that you can see both of them there. There's another one below it. And so there's 2, and this is just to illustrate that if they did have to move that bedroom level, which is what the middle level of that home is currently proposed to be, above the entry floor, that ultimately the deck that we are speaking about in his specific project would be at the exact same elevation either way. It would just have less house up above it in his original proposal. Anything that you guys think I missed with that?
I'm not following that. How will the deck be at the same elevation?
Basically, we can only go, we're at about 9% grade on the parking area coming off the road.
Mm-hmm.
That is as steep as I am comfortable going. So that entry floor level is pretty much fixed because of Marsh Hill Road. And so that entry level has to stay where it is, no matter what. And so it's really a matter of if the bedroom level gets built into the hillside below it or has to go above. And that's why the decks are that deck on the entry level would be at the same elevation in relation to the lake either way.
I don't think we should be talking about the specific project too much because it really is an interpretation about the verbiage there. So where it's important, but it's not relevant, I don't think.
Understood.
That's my opinion.
Members, do you have any questions for Ms. Correll?
No.
Steve? None? Thank you.
Well, Chad, it would be up to him whether do you want to speak on behalf of the decision or?
Well, I think you have my determination. As Rich mentioned, 99% of the time this doesn't come up. This is a unique case where we basically have multiple sub-levels, so it's not entirely clear. That ground story is not defined in the ordinance, so it leaves to ambiguity. I tried looking it up too in building code and things. You come up with a lot of different things. Story below plane, story below grade. There's no just perfect definition of it. So when I looked at this, I tried to look a little more at the intent. I wasn't aware of any previous decisions by the office about it, so I just looked more at the intent of the ordinance. I looked first just at the definition of yard. That's the first, and that's typically what we refer to as a setback, but in really in the ordinance, it's a yard. That's the portion of the lot joining and extending inward from a lot line or road line, which shall remain unobstructed by buildings or structures or portions thereof, except overhanging eaves, gutters, or cornices. So I think the ordinance then provides for some limited projections out into that, and that's where you have that permitted projection section. So I looked at that. It talks about unenclosed decks, uncovered porches, or other similar features not over 3 foot high above the floor level of the ground story. And that's really where it's hard to define that part. The fact that they can't be covered, they can't be enclosed, leads me to believe that that intent was that that would be a small projection. It would not go out farther. It wouldn't be something that's having a great impact on that setback. So that's why I interpreted it conservatively to say it shouldn't really matter what's going on the uphill side. If there's additional fill, if there's additional layers up there, that we're still looking at that lower projection and trying to limit that, and that everything above that should be considered a balcony, and those are limited to a 4x10 projection.
Thank you, Jim. Anybody else to speak? Then at this point, we will close the public portion of the testimony, and we'll go into session and hear and talk about this and decide what our opinion will be. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, did we get any letters?
Switch.
No. We,
Pardon? Switch off my.
I don't think
we don't get letters
I don't,
in this kind of a
I
hearing.
don't think it has to do with our interpretive hearing.
That's right.
Bruce, you didn't by chance happen to receive anything from Doug Stork yesterday or today, did you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
He was signing in the list.
He was going to write a letter, although the request to him came in a little bit late, and so.
Was he
may
aware
not
that our
have-
meetings have moved to 3
Yes.
o'clock? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's
I'm
a
sorry.
busy guy, and he
did
may
not.
have gotten tied up and not able to get to it.
We got a letter from the neighbor next door. I believe the word vehemently opposed to any variances into the setback, which I explained to her was that is not what this was about.
It doesn't really have anything to do with our interpretation, right?
No, but she understood our process now. And a phone call from a neighbor across the street, which would be above this property. And I explained to her and sent her all of the drawings, that basically from her point of view, the house would be a ranch house from Marsh Hill, looking at it from Marsh Hill Road. Or a ranch style one level home from that point of view. So those were our two communiques from the public.
So gentlemen, our task is to decide whether there was an error made by this office in the administration of this zoning ordinance. The part of the ordinance that applies reads as follows: raised terraces, unenclosed decks, uncovered porches, or other similar features not over 3 feet high above the floor level of the ground story, provided that these features shall not extend closer than 5 feet from any property line except if attached to townhouses, etc., etc. So the ground story seems to me to be the key to this. What do you consider the ground story? It's not defined in our zoning ordinance under definitions. Personally, on a search of the internet, I cannot find a definition of ground story. Ms. Gravel provided a few samples here that are all close. but none of them are spot on, I don't think. The closest one that I see, and I don't know where it's from, it says Streets and Building Consolidation Regulations 1984. I don't know who that's for. Is the only one here that mentions ground story. And it says ground story means the story of a building to which there is an entrance from the outside on or near the level of the adjoining ground or street, or so right there, if I stop right there, that sounds like we could interpret the street level as the ground story. But it goes on to say, and when there are two such stories, then the lower of the two, provided that no story of which the floor level is more than 4 feet below the level of the adjoining ground or street, shall be deemed to be a ground story. Not sure what that means.
That's
That
pretty
would be a
ambiguous.
basement.
I'm not sure what that means.
Ground or street, so it's not definitive.
Hopefully.
So you got ground or street. It's not.
So what do you believe the intent of this ordinance is?
It seems intuitive to me that the ground floor is where the main entrance to the house is. If we were to agree with the zoning administrator that the second floor, which has no access from the outside, as I understand it, it's a second basement level. I don't really know how you could call that the ground floor. You have the basement, which has egress and ingress to the house. The next floor has none. The next floor is where the main entrance to the house is in the parking lot. It seems intuitive to me that that's the main floor, or the ground floor, or the, whatever you want to call it. That's what the intent of the ordinance is, to make that the ground floor.
After thinking about this a little bit, I think maybe they did a pretty good job, by the way they worded this. Floor level of the ground story. That left it open for areas like this. We have a little leeway here at the gentleman's house, the way it's designed, the lot on there. Instead of just a straight terminology, it's that or not on there. And I agree with Michael on the ground level thing. I think ground level is the level of the driveway into the house.
The main entrance of the house. The main entrance of the house. I'm unsure. I think, Mike, you explained it pretty well. Absent of a better definition of ground story can't be the basement. If it was intended to be the basement, it would say basement, wouldn't it?
Well, if you were to give this rendering to 100 people just off the street, and you say, okay, this one here is the basement, now point to the ground floor. I bet you everybody would point to this one. I can't imagine anybody would say that this is the ground floor. To me, that's another basement. That's my opinion, but it seems obvious to me.
So, again, our mission here is to decide whether we think an error was made in the interpretation of this ordinance or it wasn't. So, do I have a motion to say one way or the other?
I'll make a motion that we say an error was made and that the ground floor is where the main entrance to the building is.
Ground story.
Ground story.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. It's unanimous then? There you have it.
There you go.
I don't think it's very clear. I don't like it.
This would be a good case to embellish on the ordinance. I mean, you know, more than,
Let me finish. Let me take care of a little housekeeping here. Or we got something to sign for this?
You do. You can go ahead.
Of course. All right, board. Do we have our next meeting scheduled yet?
It would be December the 21st. We have no cases, so there is no meeting. It'll be January.
It's past
Sorry.
it's past the cutoff.
Today is the deadline.
Okay, so no members, no meeting in December. So. Members, can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second? Second. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.